Well, earlier today, U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken announced in a statement that the U.S. government assesses that members of Russia's forces have committed war crimes in Ukraine. The announcement comes as Russia's brutal attacks on the Ukrainian cities of Mariupol and Kharkiv are raising concerns for other cities and millions there. Joining us now to talk about the latest developments in Ukraine is George Thomas, senior international correspondent at CBN News, who is reporting live from Kyiv, Ukraine. George, welcome back to the program.
Hey, Tony, thank you so much for having me back on the show. Always a pleasure, sir.
So give us the latest of what's happening on the ground there in Ukraine.
Yeah, so this is the second week that we have had a 35-hour curfew. It started on Monday, ended on Wednesday morning at 7 a.m. And they had one of these, Tony, last week. And in that 35-hour period, the Ukrainians managed to push the Russians further back away from the Russian capital. From the Ukrainian capital. They did the same again this second time around, using the curfew, getting everybody off the streets. And so they went after Russian forces in Bucha, as well as Irpin and Homostel and Gomel, as well as to the east near the Brovary area, and then also further down south to Kherson. Kherson is the only city that the Russians have 28 days into their invasion that they've managed to capture. Well, the Ukrainians have gone on the offensive, clearly, in all three of these areas. And in fact, there is reporting that in the northwest quadrant of Kyiv, about 30 kilometers from where I am, the Ukrainians have managed to surround, to encircle the Russians in Bucha as well as Irpin. You remember these two towns pretty much saw the beginning of the war 28 days ago, and they've been bombarding Irpin and Bucha ever since. And right now, the reporting is that the Ukrainians have managed to encircle them. And I think in the days ahead, you're going to see them go after their supply lines and, in essence, starve them from food as well as military ammunition and other pieces of equipment. It's just absolutely stunning that you have the second largest military in the world, in essence, stuck in their operation. That is the word used by German Chancellor Olaf, who in essence said that the Ukrainians are stuck. And in fact, there's also new reporting tonight that Russians on the northern part of Kyiv are actually, Tony, beginning to create defensive positions. They're defending themselves, their positions, as opposed to moving forward, as we have seen over the last 28 days, attempts to move forward.
George, NATO estimated earlier today that somewhere between 7,000 and 15,000 Russian soldiers have been killed in these 4 weeks of battling in Ukraine. Now, to put that in perspective, Russia lost 15,000 men in Afghanistan over a 10-year period. What are you seeing and hearing there on the ground?
Yeah, very much the same. In fact, the Ukrainians put that number close to about 16,000 dead. Now, we're not quite sure specifically if they're including dead and injured, wounded rather. But it's interesting, a pro-Kremlin tabloid about 48 hours ago, I don't know, by accident, they leaked information showing that the Russians had indeed lost about 10,000 of their forces, and about 16,000 have been injured, which is just absolutely stunning, really is. And in fact, they've also lost 5 to 6 top generals in the process. And part of the reason is that these soldiers are just not prepared. They are not prepared. And so the Russian, the military strategists are in essence forced to put their commanding officers at the spear, the tip of the spear, in essence, as opposed to commanding and directing, giving orders from the back. And so they're going into the battle being the tip of the spear, and in the process getting killed in action. The reporting is that 5 to 6 of their top generals have died. There is also reporting that the Russians are, because of this mass casualty, they're beginning to move more troops into the theater. And then there is also concern that Belarus, Ukraine's neighbor to the north, could potentially get involved in the conflict, perhaps send 3 waves of soldiers, each wave containing close to about 5,000 troops that would come and reinforce the Russians on the north of Kyiv, as well as perhaps go to the western part of the country, putting Lviv potentially in the crosshairs.
George Thomas, I mean, you mentioned this desperation. I mean, clearly, all of the military experts are saying Russia did not expect this level of resistance from the Ukrainians. But this, as desperation sets in, not only are you going to see more military people pulled in on the ground, but there's concern now about the use of chemical weapons and even possibly the use of nuclear weapons. What are you hearing there in Ukraine?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is the playbook. I say this all the time. This is the playbook of the Russians. We've seen it when they did it in Syria. We saw it in Chechnya. We saw it in Georgia, and we saw it in 2014 in the eastern part of the country. They escalate in order to try to de-escalate, and in the process get Zelensky and others to the negotiating table. Clearly, look, when you are the attacker, and you are not making the sort of military progress and fulfilling the operations of your commanding general in 28 days, there is a sense of frustration that is clearly happening. You can see it between the deaths to the attrition rates, to those who are just abandoning their trucks, abandoning their military equipment, hardware, their ammunition, and walking off the battlefield. All of that. The concern is that, and we've seen it in the last 2 weeks, and I have reported from the scenes of high-rise 15-story apartment complexes completely destroyed, innocent civilians. There's no military operations taking place in these areas. These are the signs of a desperate tactician who, in essence, is deciding that they're going to instill fear by going after civilian targets in a way to suppress them in the process. There is some concern that the Russians are positioning their assets within missile as well as artillery fire of key cities like Kyiv, Mariupol, Kharkiv, Donetsk, and so forth. And there is talk now the Department of Defense is in serious consultation with NATO allies to provide the Ukrainians long-range surface to air capabilities that would allow them to intercept some of these longer missiles, artillery that the Russians have.
George, any feedback there on the ground in Ukraine coming from the announcement today by the Biden administration that their assessment is that there are individuals from the Russian military that is engaged in war crimes?
I mean, if you look at the definition of what the ICC, the International Criminal Court, defines as war crimes, we have seen that in the last 28 days. I mean, look, like I said, I've been, Tony, to several of these locations, and you can clearly tell that there is absolutely no evidence that the Ukrainians were using a mall. I was at a mall, a big mall on the northwest quadrant of Kyiv earlier this week, the Retroville Mall. There was no evidence that the Ukrainians were using it as for human shield. Look, I've reported from Gaza during the Israeli-Gaza war, and I remember being in downtown Gaza, and my hotel was filled with journalists. And at the bottom of our hotel, Hamas was using our hotel, the lobby, basically the underground parking lot, to launch missiles, missiles into Israel. We were human shields. There is no evidence that the Ukrainians are using civilians to hide behind in order to launch their attacks against the Russians. So, there are professional investigators who do this for a living. They are going meticulously from every single city, town, village where Russians have launched their attacks, and they're documenting it for the purposes of bringing this to the International Criminal Court. Mm-hmm. And the evidence from Boris Johnson to the President of the United States to other world leaders who have said that what Russia is doing is tantamount to war crimes.
George Thomas, I want to thank you for staying up late. I know it's late there in Ukraine. Very quickly, 20 seconds left. How can Christians here in America be praying for our brothers and sisters in Ukraine?
Hey, Tony, I have seen some remarkable, heroic acts of valor by Christians who are, they're busy driving, going into these dangerous hotspots, these dangerous places like Irpin, Bucha, Chernihiv, Mariupol, risking their lives to get people out. And then the churches have mobilized across the country, providing their churches being refuge for those who are transitioning to the West. Incredible. Be encouraged. The Church of Jesus Christ today in Ukraine is blossoming in the midst of war. They are being the hands and feet of Jesus. And I see it all around the world, whether it's Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, whenever there's conflict, the church always rises to the occasion to be the hands and feet of Jesus.
And we'll continue to pray that they continue in that. George, thanks so much for joining us today.
You're welcome. Thank you, sir.